Have you ever walked into a bar and thought, hmm, maybe a future president is like right here in this very room?
Well,
Probably not.
yeah, usually no.
But for Martin Van Buren, our eighth president,
Yeah.
that's kind of how his story begins.
It's true. Yeah, from a tavern in upstate New York to the White House,
It's pretty amazing.
yeah, he really had an impact on American
Oh,
politics.
absolutely. And you know what's so interesting about him is he was born in 1782 in Kinderhook, New York.
Hmm.
His parents were Dutch immigrants.
Right.
And so he actually grew up speaking Dutch.
It's true.
So English was his second language.
Yeah, hard to imagine that, right? A
Yes.
president whose first language wasn't English.
It's pretty wild. And his dad owned a tavern,
Yeah,
and he grew up in this tavern, so it wasn't exactly like the typical environment
right, right.
that you would think of for a future president.
Yeah, but maybe it was the perfect environment, you know? I mean, think about it. A tavern is a place where people from all walks of life come together, they share stories, they debate,
Yeah.
they argue, they learn to persuade each other. Maybe that's where Van Buren honed his political skills.
Oh, absolutely. Like just being surrounded by that energy and having to, kind of navigate
Right.
all those personalities. So,
Yeah.
I mean, even before he got into politics, he started out as a lawyer.
He did, yeah, and a good one too. And he specialized in real estate law, which actually ended up being really important for his political career later on.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, back then land was everything, right? It was the key to wealth and power.
Hmm.
And Van Buren, through his legal work, gained a deep understanding of how land ownership worked, who had the power, and how the system could be manipulated.
And so he kind of used that knowledge to his advantage.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
He knew how to work the system, and he knew how to use the law to benefit himself and his allies.
Yeah. And so he kind of starts rising through the ranks of New York politics, right? He serves in the state Senate.
Mm.
He's attorney general. And even for a short time, he's governor.
Yeah, he was ambitious, no doubt about that, but he's also really smart, and he knew how to build alliances and make connections,
Oh.
and he understood the game, right? He saw how the political landscape was changing, and he knew how to adapt.
So it's at this time that political parties are kind of starting to emerge, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the founding fathers, they weren't so keen on this idea of parties.
Right, they saw them as divisive, they worried about factions and gridlock,
Yeah.
but Van Buren, he saw things differently. He saw the potential of political parties.
Yeah.
He realized that they could be powerful tools to organize people, to mobilize voters,
Mm-hmm.
to get things done.
And so he kind of becomes like the architect
Yeah.
of the modern Democratic Party, right?
He does, yeah. He plays a key role in transforming the Democratic Republican Party into the Democratic Party we know today.
It's fascinating. And I mean, that's a huge legacy in and of itself, right?
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. The Democratic Party is one of the two major political parties in the United States today.
Mm-hmm.
And it all goes back to Van Buren and his vision.
And he really saw that these parties could like bring people together on a national scale.
Right.
Right. They could
Yeah.
create a platform.
Yeah.
And also, and I think this is key, they could challenge the existing power structure.
They could, absolutely. The old elite, they were very comfortable with the way things were.
Mm-hmm.
But Van Buren and his allies, they wanted to shake things up.
Yeah.
They wanted to give more power to the people.
To the common man, as they called them.
Exactly.
And it's amazing how this idea of challenging the status quo, it just keeps coming up again and again in American politics.
It does, doesn't it?
Wow.
It's a theme that runs throughout our history.
Right. And he forms this crucial alliance with Andrew Jackson,
Oh, yeah, that was a game changer.
who is also, kind of an outsider.
Another outsider.
Yeah. And so together, they really transform the Democratic Party.
They do. They move it away from its Jeffersonian roots and make it more appealing to a wider range of voters.
Right. And they did some really interesting things to broaden their base of support, right? Like lowering voting requirements,
Yeah, that was a big one.
which we still see those kinds of voter outreach
But
strategies.
absolutely.
Um,
They were masters of grassroots campaigning.
Yeah.
They knew how to connect with ordinary people. They used slogans. They had rallies. They even had songs.
It's interesting how they were so effective at
Right.
really connecting with people.
Yeah. They knew how to tap into people's emotions,
Yeah.
how to get them fired up about their cause.
And so while all this is happening on the national stage, Van Buren is also busy back home in New York building what becomes known as the Albany Regency.
Oh, the Albany Regency. Yeah, that was a powerful political machine.
It sounds almost like a TV show.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It was a network of loyal supporters, patronage, backroom deals. You name it.
And they basically ran New York.
They did.
Right.
They controlled appointments. They influenced legislation.
And Van Buren, he was like the mastermind.
Yeah, he was the brains behind the operation.
And we have to remember his background, right? Like, he was a real estate lawyer.
Right.
So he understood land.
He understood how land ownership worked, how it affected power dynamics.
Yeah, and so he actually used that knowledge to break up some of these huge estates.
He did. He challenged the old elite families who had held on to vast tracts of land for generations.
And he redistributes that land.
Right.
And he gains the support of all the people who benefited from that.
That's exactly right. He was a master strategist. He knew how to play the game.
And so you have all this happening at a time of massive social and economic change, right? Like, we have the rise of industry, we have westward expansion, and of course this growing tension over slavery.
Right. It was a time of great upheaval.
It's like the nation was almost like heading for a collision course with itself.
Yeah, it really was. And Van Buren, he found himself right in the middle of it all.
Yeah, he becomes president in 1837. And his presidency really coincides with one of the most turbulent periods in American history.
It does, yeah.
Right from the start, he's hit with the Panic of 1837.
Oh, yeah, that was a major economic crisis.
And it reminds me a lot of some of the recent financial crises we've seen.
Right. Banks were failing. Businesses were closing.
Yeah. Unemployment was rampant.
People were really struggling.
And he's just thrown right into this fire.
Right into the fire, yeah.
And what does he do? He champions an independent treasury system.
Yeah. He wanted to take control of the financial system, to stabilize the economy, and to limit the power of private banks.
So it was pretty controversial.
It was, yeah. Some people saw it as a necessary step to prevent future crises, but others thought he was giving the government too much power.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how those debates about the role of government in the economy, they continue even today.
Yeah, they do. We're still wrestling with those same questions about how to balance economic freedom with stability and fairness.
And so, as if this economic turmoil wasn't enough, he's also dealing with this really volatile issue of Texas annexation.
Right. Texas had declared independence from Mexico, and there was a lot of pressure to bring it into the Union. But Van Buren, he was hesitant.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First, he didn't want to start a war with Mexico. And second, he was worried about expanding slavery.
Yeah.
Adding Texas as a slave state would have upset the balance of power in the Senate.
Oh, absolutely.
And made the already tense situation between the North and South even worse.
So he's really walking a tightrope.
Yeah, he was.
Trying to avoid both a foreign war and a domestic crisis.
This is a tough spot to be in.
It really makes you realize, like, the weight of the presidency, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially during those kinds of pivotal moments in history.
Yeah, it's not just about making popular decisions.
No.
It's about trying to make the best decisions for the long-term interests of the country.
Exactly. And sometimes those decisions aren't easy or obvious. Yeah. It's tough, right? Like, you're trying to balance all these different factors.
Yeah. And, we're looking back at this with, 200 years of hindsight.
You're right. Exactly.
He was dealing with this stuff in real time.
Yeah, in the moment.
Yeah. And so one of the things that happened during his presidency was the implementation of the Indian Removal Act.
Yeah. That was a really dark chapter in American history.
And, I mean, it was actually signed by Andrew Jackson back in 1830.
Right.
But it was Van Buren who oversaw its continuation.
Yeah, and it resulted in the forced relocation of thousands of Native Americans.
Yeah, the Trail of Tears.
It's a horrible tragedy.
And it's just, such a stark reminder that progress is not always linear.
No, it's not. And sometimes even those who we think of as progressive leaders can be complicit in systems that perpetuate injustice.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to reconcile.
It is.
Right, with some of the other things that he did that seem to be aimed at creating a more inclusive political system.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that we have to look at historical figures in all of their complexity with both their accomplishments and their failings.
And so I'm curious, were there other moments during his presidency where he kind of challenged the status quo or went against the grain?
There were actually one that stands out is the Amistad slave ship controversy.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this.
So in 1839, a group of enslaved Africans who were being transported on a Spanish ship called La Amistad, they staged a mutiny.
Wow.
They took control of the ship, and they ended up off the coast of Long Island.
It's an amazing story of resistance.
It really is. And the U.S. Navy, they captured the ship, and the question became what to do with the enslaved Africans.
Yeah.
Van Buren, he was initially inclined to side with Spain.
Oh, wow.
And return them to slavery.
Because I would think, like, public opinion At this point, it was starting to shift, right?
It was, yeah, the abolitionist movement was gaining momentum,
Mm.
and there was a lot of public support for granting the Amistad captives their freedom.
So what happened?
Well, there was a huge legal battle,
Uh-huh.
and former President John Quincy Adams,
Wow.
he actually came out of retirement to defend the Amistad Africans before the Supreme Court.
That's pretty incredible.
It is, isn't it?
I mean, that he would champion this cause.
Yeah.
Especially because he and Van Buren had been political rivals.
Right. But Adams, he believed that this was a matter of principle,
Mhm.
and he was a powerful advocate for the Amistad captives.
And so what was the outcome?
Well, the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in their favor.
So they were granted their freedom.
They were.
That's amazing.
It was a landmark decision,
Yeah.
and it was a major victory for the abolitionist movement.
And what about Van Buren? Like, how did he react to this decision?
Well, he could have tried to fight it,
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't. He allowed the legal process to play out, and he accepted the Supreme Court's ruling.
That's interesting because it seems like he could have really dug his heels in.
He could have, yeah, but he didn't.
Yeah.
And I think that says something about his respect for the rule of law
Yeah.
and maybe even a willingness to evolve his own thinking.
Yeah. It really shows that he was not just, blindly following public opinion,
Right.
but that he was actually listening
Mm-hmm.
and considering different perspectives.
And the Amistad case also highlights the importance of public pressure
Mm-hmm.
and activism.
Right. Because if it hadn't been for all those people who spoke out
Yeah,
and demanded justice,
exactly.
the outcome might have been very different.
It might have, yeah.
So beyond, domestic issues, Van Buren also had to deal with some pretty tricky foreign policy challenges.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Right. Especially with Canada.
Right. Remember, there were still a lot of unresolved border disputes.
Yeah, from the American Revolution.
Exactly.
And then there was the Aroostook War.
Oh, yeah, that was a tense situation.
A lot of people don't even know about this.
No, they don't. But it was a serious conflict over disputed territory in Maine.
Yeah, and it almost led to a war between the U.S. and Great Britain.
It almost did. Yeah, things got pretty heated.
So what did Van Buren do?
Well, he took a diplomatic approach.
Hmm.
He negotiated with the British.
And he was able to avoid a war.
He was.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was a real testament to his diplomatic skills.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been so easy to just, go to war.
It would have.
Especially given the kind of like the mood of the time.
Right.
But he chose a different path.
Yeah, path of peace.
But despite all these successes, he faced an uphill battle when he ran for re-election in 1840.
He did, yeah. Yeah. The Whigs, they nominated William Henry Harrison, and they ran a really savvy campaign.
Yeah, they kind of turned Van Buren's own tactics against him.
Exactly. They painted him as an elitist, as out of touch with the common man.
Which is ironic.
Yeah. A bit ironic considering he and Jackson were the ones who really popularized those kinds of campaign strategies.
Yeah, they were the masters of the common man appeal.
Right. But the Whigs, they were able to use it more effectively.
So Van Buren loses the election.
He does, yeah, after just one term.
And he's the first incumbent president to lose re-election since John Adams.
Right, a tough blow for sure.
But even though he only served one term, I think it's fair to say that he left a pretty significant mark on American politics.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he basically built the Democratic Party into the force that it is today.
Yeah.
He shaped the two-party system, and he set the stage for a lot of the political debates that would dominate the 19th century.
It's amazing to think about how he would view the state of American politics today.
It is, isn't it?
I mean, on the one hand, he was such a brilliant strategist,
Right.
a master of political maneuvering. I think he'd be fascinated by the role of technology
Yeah.
in modern campaigns,
Mm.
the speed of communication.
Yeah, the 24-hour news cycle, social media.
Exactly.
All of that.
But on the other hand, he was also a pragmatist.
Right.
He believed in compromise, in building consensus.
Mm.
I think he'd be pretty dismayed by the level of polarization.
Yeah. The gridlock, the partisan fighting.
Yeah, he was a product of a different era when political discourse was more civil,
Right.
more focused on finding common ground.
Yeah, he believed in working across the aisle,
Yeah.
even with his opponents.
But, even though the political landscape has changed so much, the challenges he faced, they still resonate today.
They do, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, the issue of economic inequality,
Mm-hmm.
the role of government in people's lives,
Mm-hmm.
the question of how to create a more just and equitable society.
Those are timeless challenges,
Yeah.
and they're still very much with us today.
So Martin Van Buren, he may not be one of the most famous or well-remembered presidents,
Right.
But his story is a reminder that even those who don't always make it into the history books
Yeah,
can still have a profound impact on the course of events.
absolutely. They can shape the world in ways that we might not even realize.
Well, that's a great note to end on, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the life and legacy of Martin Van Buren,
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
a president who, despite his flaws and challenges, left a lasting mark on American politics.
Absolutely, you did.
And for all of you listening out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep the conversation going.
We'll see you next time.